The roar of engines shattered the serene evening as a gang of bikers descended on Henry Miller's quiet home. They tore through his yard, laughing as they trampled his flower beds and spray-painted crude insults across his pristine white fence. Their leader, Ray, sneered as he toppled the flagpole, a symbol of everything Henry had dedicated his life to defending. "Stay inside, old man," Ray jeered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This neighborhood belongs to us now. You're nothing." Henry stood silently on his porch, his calm gaze fixed on the destruction. To the bikers, his silence was submission. To the neighbors watching in stunned disbelief, it was resignation. But they were all wrong. What Ray and his gang couldn't see was the unshakable steel in Henry's eyes, the quiet resolve of a man who had faced far worse and come out victorious. What happened next would leave the bikers questioning everything they thought they knew about power. And for Henry, it was just another day, proving that dignity and justice always win. But let's start from the beginning. On the quiet outskirts of a small town, nestled among the trees and chirping birds, stood the humble home of Henry Miller. It was a postcard-perfect scene. A white picket fence framed a well-manicured lawn, dotted with blooming flowers, and an American flag swayed gently on a sturdy flagpole. Henry, a reserved and courteous man in his late 60s, had spent most of his life in service to his country. Yet, behind his unassuming demeanor lay a storied past that few in the neighborhood were privy to. Henry's mornings typically unfolded with precision. Today, as usual, he sipped tea on his porch, his favorite mug in hand, and observed the peaceful rhythm of life around him. But the tranquility was shattered by the distant roar of engines, a sound growing louder, more menacing. A group of motorcyclists burst into view, their bikes tearing up the gravel as they skidded to a halt in front of Henry's house. The leader, a towering man with a tattoo of a skull stretching across his neck, dismounted with theatrical flair. He wore a grin as sharp as his leather jacket's spikes, his eyes scanning the property like a predator eyeing its prey. Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Too quiet around here, old man. Let's liven it up, huh?" The gang erupted into laughter, their voices bouncing off the surrounding homes. A burly rider, attempting to play along, kicked a stray soccer ball into Henry's flower bed, decapitating a row of daisies. Another poured beer onto the lush, emerald grass, the foam glinting in the sun like an insult. Henry rose from his chair with the calm precision of a man unfazed by chaos. He stepped to the edge of the porch, his weathered hands resting lightly on the wooden railing. His expression betrayed no anger, no irritation, only a composed curiosity. "Is there something I can help you with?" he asked evenly, his voice carrying a calm authority that seemed to cut through the noise. The leader, who introduced himself as Ray, smirked and stepped forward. "Yeah, we're looking for some entertainment. Spice up the neighborhood. What do you say?" Henry's gaze shifted briefly to his trampled flowers, then back to Ray. For a moment, the street seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. Instead of rising to the bait, Henry tilted his head slightly, as if appraising an unruly child. Without a word, he turned and walked back inside, the soft creak of the screen door punctuating the gang's laughter. "Did you see that?" Ray jeered. "Ran off like a scared little mouse." The gang roared in approval, their taunts echoing long after Henry disappeared into his house. From behind his curtains, Henry watched them for a moment, his eyes sharp, calculating. He didn't flinch when another flower bed met its demise, or when one of the bikers revved his engine in defiance. Instead, he allowed himself a small, knowing smile. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street, the gang finally tired of their antics and roared away, leaving behind a trail of crushed flowers and spilled beer. The quiet returned, but the air buzzed with an unspoken tension, like the lull before a storm. And inside the house, Henry Miller calmly placed his mug in the sink, his movements deliberate. The night was young, and he had no intention of letting this go unanswered. The next day, the bikers returned, their roaring engines signaling their arrival like an unwelcome storm. This time, their antics escalated from nuisance to outright vandalism. The once pristine white picket fence surrounding Henry's yard was now a canvas for crude graffiti, bright streaks of red and black paint smeared across the slats. One of the bikers, wielding a can of spray paint, left a poorly drawn caricature of Henry with exaggerated glasses and a hunched back. The group cheered and hooted as the flagpole, a symbol of Henry's pride, was toppled unceremoniously. The clanging metal echoed down the quiet street, and one biker triumphantly kicked the fallen pole, sending the flag fluttering into the dirt. Not content with their destruction, another member of the gang dragged a trash bin to the center of Henry's yard, dumped its contents, and set it ablaze. Ray, the ringleader, stood at the center of the chaos, hands on his hips, surveying the destruction with a smirk. "What do you think, old man?" he shouted toward the house. "Maybe you should call the cops, though I don't think they'd be much help," he added with a mocking laugh. Henry appeared at the door, his calm demeanor undisturbed by the spectacle in front of him. He took a slow sip of tea from his mug before speaking. "I'd suggest you leave before you regret staying," he said evenly. The simplicity of his words only fueled Ray's bravado. "Oh, we're shaking in our boots, aren't we, boys?" he taunted, earning another round of laughter from his crew. Henry didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked back inside, shutting the door with deliberate calmness. Henry decided to take a stroll to the corner store. The crisp evening air was a welcome reprieve, but as he reached the dimly lit sidewalk, the low growl of engines pierced the quiet once more. The bikers were waiting, their silhouettes looming under the amber glow of a street lamp. "Well, look who decided to join us," Ray said as he stepped forward. His tone was dripping with mockery, and his gang chuckled like a pack of hyenas. Ray reached out, gripping Henry's shoulder with exaggerated force. "How about a couple of bucks for our entertainment fund, Grandpa? Or are we going to have to teach you a lesson?" Henry looked down at the hand on his shoulder, then up at Ray. His expression was calm, his voice steady. "You really don't know who you're dealing with," he said simply. Ray barked a laugh, clearly entertained by what he took as empty defiance. "Oh, I think I've got a pretty good idea," he sneered, and with a shove, Henry stumbled back and hit the ground. The commotion drew a small crowd of onlookers, neighbors and passers-by who stood frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and helplessness. No one dared to intervene. Henry, undeterred, dusted himself off and rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as though brushing away a minor inconvenience. He met Ray's mocking gaze with a measured stare before speaking again. "You'll regret this," Henry said quietly, his tone so even it sent a ripple of unease through the gang. The gang laughed again, but this time there was a hint of nervousness in their voices. Henry turned and walked away, his posture upright, his steps unhurried, leaving the bikers to revel in what they thought was their victory. As the onlookers whispered among themselves, one elderly neighbor muttered under her breath, "That man's not one to mess with. They'll find out soon enough." And though Ray and his gang were too busy celebrating to notice, the faintest hint of a smile played on Henry's lips as he disappeared into the night. The stage was set, and the bikers had no idea what awaited them. By the third night, the bikers, emboldened by their unchecked mischief, decided to take things to a new level. Ray rallied his crew, calling for a grand finale. They arrived in larger numbers than before, engines roaring like thunder, the scent of gasoline heavy in the crisp night air. Each of them carried tools of chaos, spray cans, chains, and most notably, a container of fuel. Their mission: burn a section of Henry's picket fence and post the spectacle online as a testament to their so-called dominance. The gang surrounded the property, their laughter echoing in the quiet neighborhood. Ray took center stage, holding a lighter aloft like a prize. "All right, boys," he bellowed. "Let's give the old man a show he'll never forget." As Ray leaned forward to ignite the fuel-soaked section of the fence, something unexpected happened. The entire yard was suddenly bathed in an intense, blinding light. Floodlights flared to life from multiple angles, illuminating every inch of the bikers and their destruction. Startled, the gang froze in place like deer caught in headlights. A deep, commanding voice sliced through the silence. "Everyone, stay where you are!" From the shadows surrounding the house, figures emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered men and women clad in military uniforms. Their disciplined movements exuded authority, and the reflective patches on their jackets gleamed ominously in the bright light. A few were accompanied by alert, well-trained dogs, their ears perked and eyes locked on the intruders. Henry stepped out from his front door, his demeanor calm but commanding. He was no longer the quiet man in a cardigan. Tonight, he stood tall in his military dress uniform, polished metals gleaming proudly across his chest. The transformation was startling, like seeing a lion emerge from what had seemed a sleeping house cat. "Allow me to introduce myself," Henry began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the yard. "Henry Miller, retired colonel and former commander of an elite special forces unit. And these," he gestured to the uniformed men and women surrounding the bikers, "are my people." The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of the unexpected turn of events. Ray, attempting to salvage his leadership, stammered, We were just messing around. No harm meant, right, guys?" Henry's sharp gaze locked onto Ray, silencing him instantly. "Messing around?" he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "That's an interesting way to describe arson and vandalism." He stepped closer, his polished boots crunching the gravel beneath him. "You seem to have a problem with discipline. Lucky for you, we specialize in that." One of the veterans stepped forward, his large frame and no-nonsense expression amplifying the tension. He addressed the bikers directly. "You're going to fix every single thing you've damaged, and then you're going to learn a little respect, starting now." Henry turned to the lead veteran with a nod. "Make sure they understand what accountability feels like." Under the watchful eyes of Henry and his team, the bikers were handed buckets, brushes, and paint. Grumbling under their breath, they began scrubbing away the graffiti and repainting the fence. The same hands that had once eagerly destroyed now worked feverishly to repair. Ray, still clutching the lighter, was singled out by Henry. "As for you," the colonel said, stepping closer, "I suggest you rethink your leadership skills. Leading your crew into trouble is one thing, but underestimating your opponent? That's just embarrassing." The neighborhood, once silent, began to stir. Lights flickered on in nearby houses, and curious neighbors emerged to watch the scene unfold. Phones appeared, cameras rolling, capturing every humiliating moment of the gang's forced labor. One neighbor, an elderly woman in a pink bathrobe, chuckled as she recorded. "Looks like the big bad bikers bit off more than they could chew," she muttered, earning a ripple of quiet laughter from the crowd. Ray, now sweating under the weight of public shame, finally mustered the courage to mutter, "We're sorry, okay? Can we just go now?" Henry tilted his head, considering the plea. "Not until the job's done," he said evenly. "And trust me, Ray, you'll want to finish quickly. The next round of reinforcements isn't quite as patient as I am." By the time the bikers were finished, dawn was breaking over the horizon. The fence gleamed white once more, and the yard was spotless. Exhausted and humiliated, the gang stood in silence, awaiting their next directive. Henry surveyed their work, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You've done a decent job," he said finally. "Perhaps there's hope for you yet." As the bikers slunk away toward their bikes, Henry called after them, "Oh, and one more thing. This neighborhood has cameras everywhere. Any funny business and we'll have your faces online faster than you can say, 'bad decision.'" The crowd burst into applause as the gang sped off, their engines roaring one last time. Henry turned to the gathering of neighbors, his calm demeanor returning. "Thank you, Colonel," someone shouted. Another added, "You should run for mayor." Henry chuckled, waving them off. "Just doing my duty," he said with a wink before retreating to his porch. As he settled back into his chair, his tea still warm on the table, Henry allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The neighborhood was quiet once more, and the flag flew proudly again. The group of veterans moved with precision, forming a perimeter around the bikers with the ease of seasoned professionals. The gang, which had moments ago been full of bravado, now looked like cornered prey. Their eyes darted nervously from one determined face to the next, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional shuffle of boots against gravel. "Line up," barked one of the veterans, a tall, broad-shouldered man with an air of authority. His tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, the bikers shuffled into a row, their earlier defiance replaced by palpable unease. Cameras, once used to document their reckless antics, were now in the hands of the veterans. The devices captured the gang's uneasy fidgeting and forced compliance. Ray, trying to salvage some semblance of control, opened his mouth to speak. "Look, we didn't mean any—" "Quiet!" snapped a stern veteran, cutting him off with a glare sharp enough to silence a riot. "You'll speak when you're asked to, if you're lucky." The veterans wasted no time assigning tasks. Buckets of soapy water and brushes appeared, as if by magic. "Start scrubbing," another veteran commanded, pointing to the graffitied fence. Under watchful eyes, the bikers begrudgingly began their work. Their leather jackets and fingerless gloves, once symbols of their rebellious image, now looked out of place as they awkwardly wiped paint and grime. Ray, struggling with a particularly stubborn spot of spray paint, muttered under his breath. "What was that?" asked one of the veterans, stepping closer. Ray quickly shook his head. "Nothing. Just, working." "Good," the veteran said with a smirk. "Make sure it's spotless. Colonel Miller has high standards." The veterans didn't stop at supervising the cleanup. Once the fence was restored and the yard cleared of debris, they turned their attention to the fallen flagpole. "Stand it back up," Henry ordered calmly, stepping forward for the first time. The bikers, their earlier arrogance now fully drained, struggled to lift the flagpole into place. It took them longer than it should have, and their efforts drew a growing audience from the neighborhood. By now, residents lined the street, some recording the scene with their phones, others watching with barely concealed glee. When the flagpole was finally upright, Henry adjusted the flag himself, his movements deliberate and reverent. "You've done the basics," he said, turning to face the bikers. "But there's one more thing." Ray looked up, his face flushed from embarrassment and exertion. "What now?" Henry gestured to one of the veterans holding a camera. "You're going to apologize. Publicly. On video. Word for word. And don't even think about smirking." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, but the stern faces surrounding them left no room for debate. One by one, they mumbled apologies into the camera, their voices barely above whispers. "Louder," the cameraman ordered. Ray, swallowing his pride, stepped forward. We're sorry for what we did. It was wrong. We shouldn't have..." His words trailed off, but the veteran holding the camera nodded approvingly. By morning, the video of the bikers' humiliation was trending online. Clips of their forced apologies, set against the backdrop of their earlier vandalism, drew waves of condemnation and ridicule. Comment sections were flooded with remarks like, "Big talk, no action," and "The mighty bikers, humbled by a neighborhood hero." Local law enforcement, alerted to the gang's antics, quickly launched an investigation. Charges of vandalism and disorderly conduct loomed over Ray and his crew. Henry sat on his porch, sipping tea as the neighborhood buzzed with conversation. One of the veterans approached, a satisfied smile on his face. "You're still as composed as ever, Colonel," he remarked. Henry's lips curled into a faint smile. "Sometimes it's better to let your enemy think they've won. Makes the final move all the more satisfying." The veteran chuckled, nodding in agreement. "You've got a knack for timing, that's for sure." Around them, neighbors clapped and cheered, some calling out jokes. "Henry, you're a star," one shouted. "Hollywood's got nothing on you." Henry waved off the praise with a modest shrug, his expression as steady as ever. "Just doing what needed to be done," he replied, his tone light. As the crowd began to disperse, Henry stood and adjusted the flag on its pole, ensuring it caught the morning breeze. The same air of calm dignity surrounded him, unshaken by the events of the past few days. The neighborhood had returned to its peaceful rhythm, and Henry Miller was once again its quiet guardian.